Committee. We are still getting used to holding Zoom room meetings online. Thanks to folks who've made it. We had to make some changes recently. There have been some unhelpful participants in, I guess, other meetings online. So we've tried to adopt some security and control measures to help this go as smoothly as can be expected. You all, I believe, got my email. There's actually going to be a different Zoom ID link and password for each meeting. Susan is working to make sure the latest and greatest is posted on the town website. Let me begin by just confirming the roll so far. So when I read your name, please say that you're present. I guess this is like high school. Mr. Lutz, David.
Here.
Jonathan
Present.
Hurwitz.
Here.
Kristen Baelish.
Here.
Kiara Moore.
Here.
Mike Huff.
Here.
And Susan Klein. I will unmute Susan. Are you there, Susan?
Here.
Outstanding. Wonderful. And I think I covered all the advisory committee members. If I didn't, please chime in. Okay. Susan Jacobson, our administrative support person, is with us. Thank you, Susan, for all your work helping get these meetings together. We also have with us tonight Blythe Robinson and Todd Lindmark from the town. And Susan, can you go over the agenda for tonight, if you could? It looks like Susan is still working on allowing.
Also says she's muted, Arthur.
Okay, I unmuted. Interesting, she refuses to unmute.
Okay, here I am. So this evening, we're going to have a presentation from Fire Chief Kinney and a presentation from Police Chief Stone. And we have one set of minutes to approve. And that is, I think Blythe may want to bring us up to date a bit on what took place in the select board meeting last night. And that's it for our agenda tonight.
Okay, so welcome to our fire chief. Let me pull up your name. Yes, Mr. Kinney. Hello, welcome. And Brian Beachkowski also just joined us from the advisory committee. Say hello, Brian.
Hi, can I point out one thing?
Yes.
In the meeting notice, there were two links to two different Zooms, one with this meeting number and password and one with ending in 505. And I was sitting there in the virtual holding pen until I thought maybe there's a different link. So I wonder if there are people who also went to the old link.
Susan just updated or recently updated the website link, which is what you're talking about. The website link is different from the one that I just sent you, I believe.
Okay, I was looking at one from a calendar invite that we had gotten, or the original notification. So, okay.
Subsequent to us setting that up, there was a decision made to use different Zoom room links. So we're still trying to catch up with that. So apologies to folks who we're losing, doing our best to keep with everyone. And with that being said, I will turn it over to Chief Kinney.
All right, good evening. So this is my first kind of go around doing a presentation over Zoom. So I appreciate you all's understanding and bearing with me. I have a little short presentation. I don't know if the screen share will work, but I'm going to try it. If it doesn't, I think all of you have a copy of the abbreviated presentation that we can just follow through or follow along. Oh, okay, I can't do it.
Let me set that up so that you can very quickly.
Okay.
Here. And this is not letting me. I do not understand why it's not letting me. Apologies for the delay here. For some strange reason, I am not able to do that. What I will do is, while you don't go ahead and get started, Chief, if you would, I will pull up the document that you provided to Susan, and I will do my best to share my screen and follow along here.
Okay, that works. It's just the first slide after the title slide is just a little bit about the fire department and what our staffing levels are currently and how we deliver services. What I tried to do with this presentation is just give you a kind of a where we are staffing wise now with having a safer grant and those kind of things, and kind of the driving forces or factors that make that a responsible staffing level. So I just wanted to touch base on that and give you a little synopsis of our manpower and what it is that we do. So the current fiscal situation, obviously the town and the local IFF successfully negotiated a new 3-year contract that adjusted compensation to make it comparable with the surrounding communities. The department was also awarded and accepted staffing for adequate fire and emergency services response for 2 additional full-time firefighter medics. These 2 factors have created a challenging fiscal situation for our upcoming fiscal year, and is the reason that we have such a fairly significant increase in our budget. This coming into this year of the collective bargaining agreement, educational incentive, and different obligations based on the contract are the reason for our significant increase. Things that we've done to kind of try to mitigate that impact. So we adjusted our ambulance billing rates to adequately reflect the level of services and quality of care that we provide. Our goal and our hope is that the increased revenue from ambulance receipts is going to be there to help bridge the gap in the funding needed to support, a level service or to support our budget. One thing that we just recently did also was we recently posted an RFP for our comprehensive EMS administrative services, which include billing and collection. So what we are anticipating as other community or surrounding departments have is we are anticipating there'll be we'll have an increased collection rate, based on having a comprehensive administrative services system in place that will help us to be even more efficient and more effective at adequately collecting and billing for the services that we provide. Just a little update on that. Our projection for this year with our current billing company was in the neighborhood of about $450,000. With the increase in the billing rates, if we stay on that same course of projected responses or transports, that same revenue would equate to about $640,000. So it's a pretty decent increase in what we may expect. Obviously we can't guarantee a certain number of transports or what level of intervention we're going to do, but based off of trending, we should be in that's a fairly conservative number too. So the years previous, dating back, for example, last year we had $502,000 in receipts or revenue brought in, and in 2018 it was $537,000. So we fluctuated since 2016. We've been at a half a million or more. The highest being in 2017, we were about 560,000, and the lowest being last year at 502. And the projection was based on that number being even lower, this year, if we would have stayed at the same billing rate. So, the projection is conservative, and thank goodness it is, because right now, with where we are with the pandemic and everything, our response and transport numbers, or our transport numbers are down. Our response numbers aren't necessarily, but people are less inclined to go to the emergency room or the hospital if they have an ailment that is not severely life-threatening, because they don't want to risk potential exposure, obviously, to the COVID-19. So, we're working through that. But I do, before this hit really hard, our numbers were actually up. We're trending upward in our monthly receipts. And even with things being as they are now, we're on target to be right where those conservative numbers were prior to the adjustment in our billing rate. So things are looking favorable. And obviously, as in a normal year, we wouldn't be worrying about the downturn in the transports, and we'd be sitting in a comfortable situation. Other things we did that I feel like was important. We really pared down our expenses. We made the difficult decision to defer some expenses, the radio service contract, radio box service agreement. Things that we felt like we feel like they're important, but we felt like with things the way they are, obviously there needs to be some give and take, and we have to be as fiscally responsible as possible. And we made the decision that we have some personnel, we have some talent and some skill sets within the department that will allow us to meet some of those objectives and needs, and not be a burden on the budget. So we were able to reduce our expense budget by almost 20%, in trying to be responsible. And that is, that's kind of the culture of the department. The personnel we have here, I'm still fairly new, but the personnel we have been great, very responsive, and trying to do any and everything they can to, whether it's adapt and overcome or resources and things we have, or, what we're doing now is we're handling some of the smaller maintenance issues and equipment repair stuff. We're handling that in-house. We have some talented personnel that can do that, radio programming and servicing. We have personnel that are stepping up and helping with that and helping fill those voids. And we felt like that was something we continue, for another year, and then, re-examine things after the year is up. So we feel like this put us in position to be able to provide the level of service that our citizens and community have grown accustomed to. The next slide, I'm not going to get in detail on these. This is just to cover, some of the driving forces behind, why the SAFER grant was so important, why our staffing number being at 4 is so important. And these are just, OSHA CFR 1910 just has some regulations and some things for us as our primary mission, trying to keep our citizens safe from, in the event of a fire. There are certain limitations or rules or regulations that we have to follow or that drive our staffing numbers. The other NFPA 1710 and 1720, again, these are consensus standards that, that drive why we staff the way we do. And it's, just some information so that there's a level of understanding or so that you're aware of the things that, as a fire chief, I'm looking at to try to make sure that we're, providing the best standard of care and the best level of care we can, but also following what is considered to be industry best practices, as well as, OSHA regulations and mandates. This is a table from NFPA 1720 and 1710, and we fit in that suburban area. I don't know if that translates that well for you all, but we have approximately 738 people per square mile. So we're not an urban area, which is a good thing in some ways, because as you can see in the table, our response objectives and the demand on manpower in a specific time frame is a little bit lax compared to what it would be in an urban area. So NFPA 1710 and 1720 also deal with the EMS component of what we do, which you know, I'm happy to say that we do a lot of things in an exemplary fashion in EMS, and our advanced life support standard of care is, you know, we've done a really good job. The department has a very good reputation, and we want to continue to do that. And that's also a driving factor for us to make sure that we are, you know, adequately staffed and prepared to respond to the basic emergencies, or, you know, the emergencies that we face the majority of the time. This is just a slide giving a little information about what ALS is. So that's advanced life support. It allows us as an organization to have or provide more advanced interventions to stabilize and treat patients. You know, we have over 60 pre-hospital treatments, interventions that we can do from IV therapy to chest decompression, those kind of things, respiratory therapies, evaluating EKGs, you know, transmitting those. So all of those kind of things are ALS skills, which require us to, you know, put in a lot of time and effort and energy and training, and making sure we stay up to par with the standards that are out there. So I wanted to give you a kind of picture of what it looks like. So with the proposed budget, including the Safer Grant personnel, our model or staffing 24/7, 365 would be a 2-man engine company and a 2-man ambulance. And that's significant because those units respond in essence as a company. So all 4 of those people, we meet the NFPA standard, even though they're not all on one vehicle. The NFPA standard doesn't say they have to be on one vehicle. It just says they have to be under the leadership of one commanding officer and respond as a company. So this allows us to keep continuity and to meet the intent of that standard while providing the best level of service and using our resources in the most effective and efficient way. So we staff our other primary and secondary auxiliary apparatus with our callback system and the call fire department. You know, our callback system is very important to what we do. It allows us to provide a very good standard of care, and to be able to, when we have those instances where we have calls stacked on top of each other, to be able to answer that second call and not have a citizen or a guest of the town have a unnecessary delay in getting, you know, care or treatment. Right now, we are experiencing multiple calls. When we get a call, about 51% of the time, we're having another call stacked on top of it. And the callback system allows us to be able to be in a position where we can answer that call appropriately and with adequate resources. The other big piece of that is that it also allows us to keep revenue in town, because we're able to staff our second ambulance at about a 92 to 95% rate for our second responses. So, you know, all of those second medicals, for example, you know, if we didn't have the callback system and we had to rely on mutual aid, we would be in essence sending that revenue to a neighboring town as opposed to keeping it in our town and offsetting our expenses and our budget. I wanted to give a little insight or a little information about how the callback system works. It's a tiered system, and it's based exclusively on associated risk and the hazards present. So just for information purposes, when we do a full recall, which means everyone on the department that isn't working is allowed to or called upon to respond if available, our average number of individuals is 4. And the reason that number is kind of important is if we talk about the graphic from earlier, the chart for NFPA, you know, we obviously rely on mutual aid anytime we have a building fire or a significant response. But the goal is to get a minimum of 10 people to the scene within 10 minutes, 80% of the time. So my goal and my responsibility in this is to try to take as large a chunk of that as possible in our initial response. So we're guaranteed to get 4. You know, we're going to have mutual aid come from 2 other towns. And then we have our 4 people that generally we can count on when we have a full recall. We can meet those numbers and those objectives, which then helps us more effectively mitigate and combat whatever hazards we're presented with on the fire ground. On a company recall, that's we have the department is divided in half. And when we do a company recall, that means we're requesting, you know, usually another company to be on the road. Usually in the event, if we have like for example, a fire alarm we had one at Pondville Correction a few nights ago. We did a company recall because we did need the ladder truck and we needed more personnel to be able to adequately ventilate the building in a safe manner and properly search and make sure all the hazards were taken care of. In that instance, we did not have to call a mutual aid engine company, but the decision was made to do the company recall. And on company recalls, we get an average of about 2 people. Shift coverage recall is the one that if you were listening to a scanner, you would hear that a lot. That is when we have, it's basically we're recalling man for man. So when we do shift coverage recall, it is because the ambulance is committed and making a transport. Usually you can count on at least an hour to an hour and a half once our ambulance is committed and is making a transport to a hospital. Those 2 individuals that do the transport are going to be out of service, or they'll be unable to respond to a call in Norfolk for at least an hour to an hour and a half. So we use the shift coverage recall to do that. And it's on a man for man basis. So what that means is if 2 people go on the transport, then the callback is filled once 2 people come to the station. And basically what that gives us the ability to do is to take on that second call and still, you know, be able to take the second ambulance out properly staffed with leaving an engine company staff. So the way our staffing model is, you know, it allows us to lower our risk from a fire perspective and from an emergency medical perspective. But we do it very conservatively. For instance, we don't call for shift coverage until we can confirm that we are actually going to have to make a transport. You know, there are departments around us that, you know, once the ambulance leaves the building, or once their apparatus leaves the building, they make, you know, they call for a recall. We don't do that. We are very conservative. And if there's a call, for example, where we may be on scene for an extended duration, but, you know, we have the ability to say, okay, we'll be able to cut the ambulance loose. So we won't do a recall in that case. You know, if we're on like an alarm call or something like that, we won't do a recall in many cases where some other departments around us may. So we try to be very conservative because we know there is a fiscal impact. And we also want to make sure to balance, you know, addressing what the risk and hazards are, but also being fiscally responsible in how we manage the program. This is just a quick synopsis of how the system works. And the bargaining unit has right of first refusal for the callbacks. But interesting, you know, our callback system and our call department has been very important and effective for us. And since I first did this presentation and this slide, Tyler Connolly, who was basically one of our most active call members, we now hired him full-time because he did such a good job as a call member, and we had those positions open. He's now one of our full-time personnel. We still maintain good active members in the call department, and they do fill gaps for us quite regularly. Sorry. All right. So that's the end of my little presentation. And now I'm open for any questions or anything anyone may have in reference to the budget. You can feel free to ask.
Thank you very much, Chief Kinney. Any questions that advisory committee members have. Yes, Kristen, I see your hand is up.
Thank you very much. That was a great presentation, and it's nice to finally meet you virtually. And welcome to town. So I was curious about the deferral of the radio service contract and the service agreement. Can you talk a bit about what those things are and what the implications are of deferring those things?
So for us, the radio service contract, we have not, or at least since, based on my discussion with my personnel, we have not had a company contracted to provide service and updates and upgrades to our radio system and our radio system infrastructure. But we do have well, I am a communications, FEMA credentialed communications leader and communications technician. And we also have 2 other members on a department who are very gifted when it comes to radio systems and things of that nature. So the reason we chose to defer that was because we felt like we could continue to maintain that in-house at least for another year, maybe another 2 years. We do have some things like the narrow banding that's been done on the radio system, which was a FCC requirement. Not trying to get too technical, but there are some things that coming down the line, we'll have to have something in place, and we'll continue to explore that. And if we can take care of it in-house by sending people to more training, and we'll try to do that. But I do think there are some things infrastructure-wise that it would be good and maybe save us in the long run if we had a contract in place to take care of things like our repeater, making sure the battery backup systems and things like that are in place, making sure our antenna towers and things like that are being maintained and taken care of. Like I said, right now, I think where we are, I think we can manage and take care of that. But I do think in the future we will have to address that. The radio box service agreement is the same type of thing. We have things set up. We do a lot of monitoring on our own. And right now, instead of having an obligated contract, we're kind of managing that on a case-by-case basis when there's a trouble or a problem. Fortunately, as we've been doing that here recently, a lot of the trouble and issues haven't been our responsibility or on our end. It's been some of the businesses or occupancies who've had some issues in their systems. And we just continue to try to manage it that way. We haven't had to have our radio box service company come into play for things in-house, which is a good thing. But again, eventually or at some point we will want to have that in place to alleviate having a potential issue or some type of catastrophic failure because we, maybe didn't maintain things exactly the way that they would prescribe or things like that. But we have been able to do that. We have our computer and everything set up so we're able to monitor our radio box system, as it stands right now. And I think also having the MEC online now, we have some support from them as well that help us, take care of those things in a more appropriate fashion. So I just, we want to try to make sure we use all of those resources. I do know that it's something in the future we're going to have to address, but right now we felt like, we have the capability to keep those things going and to keep providing the level of service that we have by trying to take care and mitigate some of those things in-house.
Great, thank you.
Okay, other questions that people have? Any hands to raise from the advisory committee? I do not see any. Anyone else would like to answer a question from the public or? No. So, okay. So yes,
sorry, for some reason I can't find raise my hand politely. So I apologize for the interruption, but I just wanted to say that I do have somebody that has been in the waiting room trying to get in that I have texted and requested their last name because it's only a first name. So I just kind of want to make everybody aware of that if anybody hears any feedback from neighbors, friends, residents that they weren't able to get in, one of the things that we have been advised is to get both first and last names to try to prevent some of the Zoom bombings that have taken place.
Thank you. Yes. And I think when we're hosts or co-hosts, we can't raise our hands. So thanks for sharing that. Blythe, yes, please go ahead and share.
She's muted.
Mute.
I keep my buttons straight here. I just wanted to weigh in on the chief's budget because I certainly appreciate that it's one of the higher increases on a percentage basis of all the budgets across the organization. But I think as we look at them all this year, we have a real opportunity to get the department to the level of staffing that town's been hoping to achieve for a number of years and was slowly working towards. But this grant really gets us there. And, it is a bit of a difficult year because the provisions of the contract settled a year ago. Really, the second year is the year that it was most significant in terms of cost. Once we get through this year, those costs will be leveled off, and the grant pays 75% for the second year, and then 35% for the last year, which helps us, with the onboarding of the full cost for the town. And before the chief came on board last year, Deputy Chief Petruchek put in place with some assistance from Todd and I, the newer rates, and as Aaron said, we're seeing the fruits of that now. We're cautious to raise the revenue any further from what we've done this year, because we don't want to get ahead of ourselves on that. But I'm cautiously optimistic, as he is, that we will get to a good place in terms of that being able to help cover these expenses going forward, and also looking forward to a new ambulance billing contract that will lower that cost. We've already lowered it somewhat in the budget, and not necessarily be more aggressive in billing, that wouldn't be the right term, but helping us be more responsible about what the town should be receiving for the services it provides. And especially in a time like this, I would like to point out that we have taken care to make sure that we have provisions for people who have difficulty to pay, so we can deal with those. But when the town should be paid for its work, because as you all know, we only get to bill when we transport. We are now competitive to our other communities where we hadn't been, and I think we'll be in a good place going forward. So I just wanted to cover those couple of points. Thanks.
Thank you. Susan Klein, yes, you had a question.
Yes, it's not on the fire department budget. Two things. One, if we're going to require that citizens supply their entire name, we should also make everyone in this room put their whole name. Obviously, we all know who each other are, but the town people who are joining may not know who we are specifically. And we have a number of people who only have their first name. And if you don't know how to do it, if you click on the bottom where it says participants, and then you go over to the side where you see your name, click more, drops down, and it asks to rename. You can rename it your full name. And Susan, if anybody asks you how to do that before they can join a meeting, they click on participants. You can let them join, and then they can click on participants and rename themselves if they can't figure out how to do it before they enter the meeting. I just wanted to make that point.
Yes, that's good advice. Thank you. We will, of course, chat to someone, even if they just have a first name, but it's just easier if, Arthur Franzak says Arthur Franzak when I connect. So thank you. Clarity is best. Brian, yes, you had a question.
He's muted.
I just wanted to say that I'm really pleased that the multi-year effort on the ambulance claims, I remember a few years ago, that was a big issue in both getting the rates up and having a higher collection percentage on transports. The change over years has been astounding, and just want to appreciate that has been a long effort in the making, and it is bearing fruit.
Excellent. Other questions for Chief? No questions for the chief? Okay. Well, thank you very much, Chief Kinney. Appreciate the presentation. We'll figure out how to make you a co-host next time.
All right.
That'll go a little bit better. Thank you very much for the information.
All right. Thank you.
So Susan, what do we have up next?
Chief Stone is up next.
And I see him there. Welcome, Chief Stone.
Thank you. So this is one of the fun time for me, learning Zoom. Sorry about a couple of weeks ago, but I have been brought up to speed. Can't teach an old dog new tricks. That's not true. So here we are. As you know, the police department has been fortunate enough to be rated number 3 as a safe community. So we want to keep that going. It's because of the hard work of the men and women of the department. Our department is changing. I know that those of you who have been on the committee for a while are well aware that we've been having retirements because a lot of the people that came on were in the post-Vietnam era and then in the 80s. And if you count out 32 years, we're there. So they're starting to go out in large numbers. So we've been working on that, trying to get newer staff trained and ready to go. So it's been a challenge. This year, I have one person who's going to be retired by June 30th, one on July 11th, and one on August 29th. So that means we'll be short 3 people. We're short now 1, but we will be short 2 more. So that's going to be a challenge in and of itself. So we have a couple lined up to go to the academy in August, but they won't graduate until after the first of the year. So we'll be that 3 short all year for the rest of this year, calendar year. So that's a struggle in itself. So we have a budget. It was a few weeks back. It was, I want to say a month or so, about 2 months ago, it was 3%. Now it's back down to 2.3. So probably the only thing that's made that possible is the fact that I have the 3 people retirement and pay classification, and we're going back to the entry level. It wouldn't be possible otherwise. We would have had to do layoffs if it was if we even considered a 0% or anything less than that. It just wouldn't be possible. We'd have to have layoffs. And right now, honestly, we're still at the point where we have the federal standard says we should have 2 or between 2 and 2.3 officers per 1,000. So it's either be 24 or 27. We're at 21. So if you want to look at our staffing model, we have a chief, a deputy chief, a lieutenant, 4 sergeants, and 14 patrol officers. That should add up to the 21. I know if we talked about it in Rentham, they have about the same number of people, but they have 1 extra sergeant. They have a 5th sergeant. Franklin, obviously a much bigger town, but they have 3 lieutenants and 9 sergeants. So the idea is, when we get out there on the road, we need to have a minimum of 3 on the midnight shift now, where we never had to do that a few years back. Now we have, because this town's grown, we've been lacking on the midnight shift for many years, and we finally got it up to the 21 so that we now have 3. Well, part of the reason that 3 is that with the MEC, we need to have, now in operation, we used to have somebody who could kind of keep a casual eye on someone who's in lockup. It's not possible anymore. They don't look at lockup for any town. And all the 4 towns in the MEC have had to make that adjustment. So now we have 3 on there. If we have an arrest that happens on the midnight, we can leave 1 officer in the station because they just can't leave while someone's in lockup. Things happen in the jail cell, and they have to be able to respond to that, whatever it was, quickly. So as a result, we have 3 on that shift, and we like to have 4 in the afternoon, and we have 5 or 6 or 7 on the day shift. Now we know what the day shift is. We have an officer assigned to the school, the school resource officer. Many of you who live in town know who that is. We have somebody that's assigned to the court. They're there for 3, 4, sometimes 5 days a week for most of the day, at least till lunchtime. Then they come back and they help with anything that needs to be done around station patrol or whatever. It's one of the problems, and we have a detective on the day shift also. So, and it's following up on cases. And I think I've said to you in the past numerous times, we're hit with all the crimes that every town is hit with. And right now, if you're watching the news at all, you see that the credit card scams and phishing and scamming, they're doing all those things that are affecting your lifestyle, because they want to get you to give up your credit card number and start passing out money, or actually give out your bank account number and pass out money. Send me a check for $10,000. Well, they're doing that now, so it's not a good thing. So we have people who follow those things up. We try to teach the elders, the olders, the seniors, and not that I'm not far from it, but the seniors, because sometimes they get looped into it somehow. They get roped into giving up their information. And that's so unfortunate, because I know we've all heard of somebody, if it's not a close relative or somebody in your neighborhood or somewhere, somebody's heard of somebody that's happened to. So we try to avoid that by giving out a little bit of education. My detectives follow those things up. So there's a lot of things going on today in the world, and especially the COVID issue is we've made some adjustments to our scheduling so that we have people, always going to have people who are healthy, and we'll schedule that so that they can be out on the road answering the calls. Well, you're going to see them. They're not going to stop cars because that's an exposure that we're trying to limit. If we have to go to a home, and Erin's group has done a tremendous job with the medicals, and which we're going to try to stage outside those medicals right now, because we just can't risk that they have that exposure and be out for 14 days. We had one scare about 3 weeks ago, and we just can't do it. We would have lost half of our department if we had to put them all out to the 14-day quarantine. One officer we had did not have it, but he had all symptoms. So he himself had to be out for a while. Everybody else was fine. So thank goodness that the testing is expanded. There's more places to get tested. It's quicker. But that first couple of weeks that we went through this, it was a little bit difficult for us all. So we think about I want to tell you that the custodies are like 2017, we had 130, 2018 was 157, 2019, 187. We were well on a track to be over 200 before the COVID-19, because every department in Massachusetts is probably being told, like ours, don't stop any cars and don't make any arrests right now, because we can't afford to have you get exposed. If you go down the highway, you'll see the state police sitting on the side of the road on a bridge, and I'll see somebody whizzing by me at 80 or 90 miles an hour, and they're not going after them because they can't afford to have those people go out with the quarantine is the biggest issue. So I've given you a budget for 2.3%. I'd love more. I mean, let's face it. We'd always love to have more. We're going to have to replace anyone who's out, especially during this next 6 months. Well, I'm going to say the 6 months of the next fiscal. There's no question we're going to have to replace. And same as in Erin's budget, the CBA calls for a first refusal on vacation replacement. So right now, we've suspended all leave because we just can't afford to have them out. So right up until the governor lifts the restrictions, we're going to go with that plan. So again, it's up. The budget is 2.3. I'm hoping for more, but and I understand what we're being told is tough times, and there may be tough times, but I want you to know that we're going to continue to try to do the job with whatever you give us. So if you have any questions on the police, I mean, I have two other budgets. One's animal control and one's animal inspector. The animal inspector is up 3%. It could be whatever you tell it to be. The animal control is down 5,000 from what I submitted in February. So But you have those updated budgets. So if there's any questions, I'm more than happy to give them to you, give the answers if I can.
Thank you very much, Chief, and everyone on the advisory committee. Susan did send out the spreadsheets that Chief Stone's talking about. I can't really make it that large on my screen, but it's the police expense budget, the salary budget, the 2.3 that he referred to, and we have the same document for animal control. So Blythe, I see that you have a question.
Not a question. I just wanted to follow up on this budget as well. It's been interesting and actually enjoyable going through all of these budgets and learning them all in detail this year. And I very much appreciate the chief's desire to want to get to a different level of staffing. But although we debated it at length, we decided that really it's not the year to be adding staff, and that it was important to try to maintain the level of staffing. I certainly learned a lot in terms of the priority to have at least 3 people on the shift just for safety perspective. The same but different from how the fire department is managed. And we also took a very close look at expenses and felt that he did a good job of justifying that those are really at the minimum. And while he would have liked to increase them, we've kept them essentially level. We have reduced this budget by $20,000, which will come out of overtime. And that will mean that, in this, especially in the first 6-month period of this year, there will be times when the chief's going to need to make, some decisions about how many people he has on, say, the day or the afternoon shift in order to get through the budget the rest of the year, knowing that we're waiting for 3 new people to come, 2 people to come out of the academy, and then there's a sergeant position that will need to be filled. So it's going to have them at times running a little light, but I think that it will be manageable. On the animal control side, we've heard from the board that there was some concern about the need for that and the overtime. And so I asked the chief to reduce that budget by $5,000. And I think it's going to be done through a combination of cutting back some overtime and some expenses. So that budget's actually, as he pointed out, is down for next year. And so I just wanted to provide that background. Thank you.
So just to fill in a little bit on we're calling it targeted replacement. If you think about it, we have 3 people who won't be working because they're going to be retired by Labor Day. And as a result of that, we'll be sending people to the academy. Well, the people in the academy aren't going to be filling in on those slots on the schedule. So we'll be 3 short. So I've made the in the line in your budget you see is called replacement shifts. And that might be a little bit higher than it's ever been, but it's got to cover some of the shifts. And I'll be doing a weekly management exercise on which ones are going to get filled based on the needs. So when you look at that, that's where you'll see that. I mean, the only thing we didn't talk about, and it's probably for the fall town meeting again, is cars and radios and tasers and weapons and all those things that we've asked for before. But you'll hear about that later in the year as we go along. But that one about cruisers, we have one in the garage. We got it, but it's not out in the road yet because due to all the issues that are going on with trying to get equipment, it hasn't, and getting in the queue for having it installed. We're not there yet, so it's still sitting in the garage. But I have 7 cars that have over 100,000 and 3 that have 90,000 or more. So when we think about that, that's going to be, you'll have to think about that in the fall, and we'll have that discussion at a later date.
Appreciate the heads up on that. Thank you, Chief Stone. Mike, you had a question.
He's muted.
Sorry, I had to find it. Maybe less of a question, more of a comment. Yesterday, I was fishing at Bushmill Pond with my kids, and my tackle box was attacked by a rabid raccoon. And I literally thought I am not going to call this in because my kids were okay, and I decided actually not to bother because I saw the comments about, you know, things are getting tight. So I just you know, I guess my comment is, let's be careful about what we're. I mean, I think the raccoon's probably fine, but I don't want people making these decisions. I like that we have a robust and responsive, you know, support services. So that's my comment.
Well, let me just say this on that. That's a call that probably that Hillary should have had. She might have handled it carefully, because one of the things you have to avoid, and I'm told from her and from what I read that she sends me, that animals can transmit COVID. So she has to be careful about that. You all saw the news article this week about a tiger getting it from the person that took care of it. There's other animals, they can, the dogs don't necessarily get it, but they can transfer it on their skin, their fur, things like that. But the biggest possibility for a transfer is if she went up and talked to you. So at that scene, so they're getting close to you and having conversation if you had in fact had the COVID. So we're just trying to be careful with what she goes to, but that's a call that she should have gone to or got a call for. Just so you know.
Thank you. Brian, yes, you had a question.
My question is about the academy and the need to send three people to the academy this year with the restrictions on the interaction. Are the academy classes being delayed or deferred, or is there a risk that those position openings will be longer than anticipated because of training pipeline?
And in my notes that I hadn't completely shared with you, yes, the academies were running, and in the last 24 hours, they've suspended those academies until I think it's May 4th is the next date that they might be operational again. Yeah, they sit next to each other in class. They had made some modification to how they ran. They made them eat lunch in their car. They set up the desks 6 feet apart. There was a lot of things that they tried to do, but the MPTC director, the governor, and the Secretary of Public Safety made a decision. Yeah, we'll just suspend them for the time being. So to your question, is the August 3rd start date possible? It might be. I'm hoping that we're further along in this thing, and it's on the curve is going that way by then, and let's hope it is. But people have got to do what they're supposed to do. That social distancing or physical distancing and all of the other things that they tell you to do, you got to do, because this thing has to stop. It's the real deal.
Understood. Thank you. Other questions for Chief Stone? David is waving his hand. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, Art, I can't find the raise hand button, which I found last week. But Chief, a follow-up on that. So looking at your budget, those 3 line items at the bottom of the salaries are the replacement numbers for the candidates. They're the cadets that you're looking for. There's like patrol 13, 14, and 15.
Yes, that is for 47 weeks because it's August 3rd.
Okay. And those represent 2 guys. I don't see, the only ones that's still on the list is Kevin, but the other 2, I think the other 2 have retired then, or? I'm sorry.
I think I stated to Sergeant Roker is due to retire June 30th.
Okay.
Officer Degnam's supposed to go out July 11th, and Officer Susan Fortishari is supposed to go out August 29th.
Okay, great. That's what I wanted to know.
But those numbers that you see there, the 53, that's for 47 weeks in the next fiscal. So it's not 52.2, it's 47.2. Because August 3rd, in my calculations, is 5 weeks into the fiscal.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, other questions for the chief from committee members or from anybody else, staff, public? Seeing none. Okay. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, Susan. There you go. Susan Klein.
And she's muted.
Sorry sorry. Chief Stone, you may have said this and I'm just didn't hear you. Are you going to be running a pared down number of officers, or are you going to try to fill the 3 missing officers that you're going to have from August until January with like auxiliary officers? I'm just trying to figure out how you're, which one you're doing. If we're just out those officers, or if you're going to use it, you know, auxiliary, or I'm sorry, it may not be called auxiliary, but you know, the detail type officers that you pull in when you have overages that you need filled.
Okay, in order to fill in on a shift, there probably be a reserve officer, and I know you.
Sorry, that might, yes, sorry, I didn't know
Yeah.
the exact word. I'm sorry.
The ones you see on detail could be both, could be a retired person, that'll be a special police officer, but you'll also see reserve officers from full-time working one of those road details. That's not even what we're talking about here. But the reserve officer has to have a ridiculous amount of training these days in order to work. Plus, they have field training, so before they can even go out in a cruiser, and then they work along with our full-time officers, filling in where the full-time officers don't want the overtime or can't take the overtime. But to be honest, there's a lot of things in the CBA that no longer is a first refusal for the full-time. It goes right to the reserve officers. So we're taxing our reserve list right now because we're replacing retired. So we've been training. Right now we've had 4 in field training, and all 4 of them are going to get hired this summer, or have been hired recently. So we're working on the next batch. So
right, no, I'm just saying, are you going to run less officers on each shift for the 4 months that those officers are in training, the full-time officers are in the police academy, or are you going to use reserve officers to fill that? I'm just trying to figure out if we're going to have less officers on the road per shift, or if you're going to have them, they're just going to be reserve officers.
we're going to fill as many of those shifts that are left vacant by the 3 retirees with the reserves.
Okay.
So in that replacement line, you see it says there's 5 per week.
Okay.
So, and I'm going to target where we need them the most every single week with my deputy. So one of the 2 of us is going to make a decision who gets what shifts get replaced so that we can maintain a level of 3.
Okay.
And any one of you can tell me what day that the COVID virus is going to leave, and we can go back to normal operations.
I think we all wish we knew that.
Let me check my calendar. I know I have it on here somewhere. Okay, David, yes, you had another question.
I have one more question, Chief. You said that since the MAC opened, you have a problem with covering. If you jail somebody overnight, there's no one in. You have to keep someone in the department. Is that what I heard?
So on the midnight shift right now, oftentimes we'll have to keep 1 officer in because someone's got to be pretty close to and keeping an eye on the prisoner, especially if they're answered yes to the suicide question. So it's got to be real close in case they do something ridiculous. So sometimes we can call some people in. So we're going to spend extra money. We can call a reserve officer in. We could have something we call a matron or a jail keep, a special officer. We might call that person in and have them function as the jail keep, and we'll put all 3 back on the road.
And no one in MAC is qualified to do that, or you can't ask them to do that or something like that, or because you guys are in the same building, but you're not in the same office, right? Does that make any sense?
No, I missed that.
So you've got the regional control system downstairs, or upstairs.
Oh, dispatch upstairs?
Yeah. So they can't cover that, obviously.
No.
Okay, just checking. All right.
Not anymore. As you know, Dave, from being on the board for a while, the dispatch used to watch that person that had not answered yes to the suicide question. They used to watch them on the camera that was at the dispatch station. So that went out with the MEC.
Thank you.
And it's just an added, I want to call it a burden, but an added burden to the what we have to do.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Final questions for the chief. Okay, thank you very much, Chief Stone, for the presentation.
Thank you.
Susan, what is next on our agenda?
Sue's muted again.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
So next on the agenda is to approve meeting minutes from February 12th, 2020.
David's been busy. Thank you, David. Do you want to talk us through these?
They were a lot longer than I would have liked. It was a free-ranging meeting. That was the planning. That was the meeting with the B1 study committee working group. And there was a lot of audience participation, which I had to try to shape into something that looked like a meeting. I think I left in a lot of the committee's comments. I tried to summarize some in some cases, but I think we've got everything we need. We didn't lose anything, and it works the way I would like it to work from a meeting minutes perspective. So if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, but I think we're all set.
So, Susan, do we distribute these so we could see them, or do we just vote based upon David's recommendation? Go ahead.
In the past, we have voted on the clerk's recommendation.
Got it.
David and I work pretty closely on these. He's asked to help that I send them in a rough format. He's trying to minimize them some. And it's always great to have a second set of eyes, but we decided a long time ago not to send them to 9 members because we could never get 9 people to agree that they should read all exactly the same.
Understood. So I believe what I'm looking for here is a batch motion to agree to then approve them all.
There's only one.
Only
sorry,
one
to,
set.
To approve the one, to then approve the one. Sorry, yes.
I'd like to move to approve the meeting minutes of February 12th, 2020.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I believe that was Susan Klein. Thank you, Susan. Who seconded? Okay, I will take a roll call vote. So please, when I call your name, say if you approve or you do not. Mr. Lutz,
Yes.
Jackie Katz.
She's not here.
Not here tonight.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. Brian Beachkovsky,
Yes.
Michael Huff,
Yes.
Kristen Baelish,
Yes.
Susan Klein,
Yes.
and Kiara Moore.
And
And
John,
I also vote yes.
And Jonathan Hurwitz.
Thank you, Jonathan. Excellent. Thank you. Scroll down a little more here on my list. Sorry about that, Jonathan. Excellent. So that is passed unanimously. Is there any other business?
So I just think we probably want to give Blythe the opportunity to provide some feedback from the select board meeting last night.
Yes, Blythe, please. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. So last night, we presented an updated version of the budget to the board. It has changed slightly since the last one, primarily because the board had told us at the last meeting that they generally were not in favor of a change in retiree health insurance premium cost share. Currently, those retirees pay 35% of the cost each month, and the state law does allow us to change it to 50. They felt that there was too much of a change, and that was worth about $120,000 in the budget. So Todd and I got our sharp pencils back out again, talked with various departments, and made an adjustment. So the budget went from a 2.33% increase to 2.42. And that was largely done by increasing slightly the revenue for ambulance receipts, increasing the free cash to 120,000, and increasing transfer station revenue by $10,000. The board also last night did approve changes in the transfer station fees and charges starting in July. And we think that that will be a reasonable amount of revenue to achieve next year. There were a number of budget adjustments totaling about $90,000. The largest one was a reduction by the school, by Norfolk Public Schools of about $30,000. We made some adjustments in the solar generation number, in the finance department budget, because we've changed some staff around the assessor's office, and we were able to reduce that a bit. I'm afraid for some reason all the pieces of paper I brought home with me tonight, I don't seem to have that one that lists all the rest of them. But overall, it came up to about $90,000. One other significant one: we hadn't reduced the library budget before, but talked to the director and reduced that budget by $10,000. And I will make sure to get those all out to you tomorrow. So the board decided not to take any action on it. There was quite a bit of debate about, given the current economic situation and what's going on in the world, should we be making further cuts now? And what I said to them was that there is very likely going to come a time when we need to do that, but we still have no guidance yet from the state about whether or not they are going to reduce the budgets and the local aid, or and when. They were supposed to have a call yesterday to talk about economic indicators, and that got put off. And so far, they've been pretty mum about what they're going to do, and we're not sure when we will know that, if it's going to be before our town meeting. And I'm sure that there will be some pressure on some of our local receipts. I think the only one that's going to be immediate is restaurant and meal taxes. I think we've seen that already. But I spoke to building department this morning, and they're really not seeing any tail off in permits right now. So the board decided not to vote on anything, given that we're still continuing to monitor these things. And with town meeting pushed off to June, we have a little more time. We did, back to retiree health, we did give them what the alternatives would look like if they were comfortable with a different set of changes rather than a 15% change for retirees. Perhaps they would want to be willing to consider 5 or 10. And just as a point of reference, if a 5% increase in the rates for retirees, or their share, would realize about a $40,000 reduction in the budget. So we'll probably circle back around to that at the next meeting and talk about it some more, and we'll see what information we get from the state, and anything else that can help us understand where we need to be so we can figure out what we need to do. One last thing I'd say is I'm going to be talking with the chair about the April 21st agenda. And one of the things that I want to do for the select board is to give them an update on what's happening with the Medicom Emergency Communications Center, the MEC, because talks are going along very well to adding 2 communities to the MEC. And the state is going to make that very financially, for lack of a better word, rewarding to the 4 towns over a couple of years to reduce our obligation and help those communities join us. And I think it'd be very helpful to all of you to understand what that could be. Just as a quick preview, the grant would cover 100% of all 4 of the town's costs for the next 2 years. And so be a significant reduction in the town budget. We won't be able to realize that for this spring, but it's something that we'll be able to continue to talk about and think about how we utilize those funds and there's a myriad of ways we could when we get to the fall town meeting. So I think that pretty much covers everything from last night, though I know Todd's on the call in case he has anything else he'd like to add.
Wait.
Thanks.
No,
Sorry.
you covered it all.
Okay, very good. Susan, yes, you had a question.
Yeah. Blythe, concerning the trying to help reduce the overall budget for this year by increasing the retirees portion, just out of curiosity, what was, other than what you stated, was their reason was they just didn't want retirees to have to pay more right now. Was it a unanimous vote? how did it fall? I'm just curious about that, considering there's select board members who are wanting other departments to lower their costs, and this was $140,000 that could have gone towards lowering the overall budget. So I'm just wondering what the rationale for that was.
They didn't discuss and debate this specifically last night. It really was
Oh,
to
I know,
talk
it was a couple weeks ago, correct?
Right. And so it ranged from a concern that retirees had already, made plans and had perhaps made their retirement plans in part based on what they're paying now. And so to change it after they've retired, could be challenging. And that it could be a significantly bigger price for some of them to pay, especially if they retired a while ago on a lower amount of income. A 5% change, I think, for most of the group would be about $16 a month. So you triple that for a 15% change, and you multiply it times 12, and it starts to become bigger.
Mm-hmm.
So,
do you know how the voting fell? Was it unanimous? Was it?
They didn't vote on it. They expressed some understanding of it and some general concern about it. And so what we decided to do was take it off the table and make the reductions of the 120,000 and bring back to them some options that they could consider. We got so deep into the conversation about the state of the state and the economy that we didn't really have time to focus on it last night. So I think what we'll try to do is bring it back to them on the 21st and see if we can't come to some consensus. And what I said to them last night, if they do come to some consensus, it might be a place where we simply reduce the budget overall, assuming that we're going into a recession and we need to cut back, not restore any of the other cuts we've made already.
Okay. What I was trying to get at is more of a comment than a question, but to say that those people who've retired had planned for that specific amount of money to be spent, can't the same thing be said for every single town employee currently who we just last week, someone raised the option of going back and renegotiating all of their current salaries and lowering their pay? Aren't all of those people also counting on the money that they have a contract signed with the town for? I would think that outside, if you're going to try to lower the cost for the town, lowering them in a way that is putting us on par with what the state guidelines say we are allowed to do. And I would think that most retirees understand would always be an option if that's what the state says can happen, versus say, I don't know, a teacher who has negotiated through her union or his union their pay for the next 3 years, and then we just go in and lower their pay. I would think that doing something that the state says we're allowed to do versus surprising people would be a much better way to save money. But
right.
But
No,
that's
I don't want to get too far into interpreting what the selectmen's discussions are, but I appreciate the point. People are looking for ways to save money. I think that the selectmen can probably best speak for themselves. I don't want to, or the select board can best speak for themselves. I don't want to put Blythe in the position of characterizing things too much.
No, I hear you. The only last thing I would say is that retirees, once they retire, are not covered by a bargaining unit. So they don't have the same rights as somebody who's still currently working. And I think it's my job and my responsibility to the town to put all the options on the table and let people decide, and I'll respect their decision either way. And we'll all figure this out.
Understood. Thank you. Thank you. David, yes.
Well, I have a couple questions. I don't know if I heard it correctly, but I think you mentioned that the solar panel revenue was adjusted downwards. Was there a reason for that? Or was there an estimate that came in that's wrong? Was there a request to make it lower or something like that? Did I miss something?
I'm sure you didn't miss anything, Dave. I see that Todd is still on the call, so he's the one that's been working most closely with Matt on that. So I'm hoping that he will, there he goes, unmute and help me with this one.
Dave, what was the question?
Hello. What's the deal with the solar panel revenue estimate going down? I think that's what Blythe said, but I'm not positive.
It's not revenue, it's expense.
So it's a reduction in cost rather than revenue.
Correct.
What's the reduction in cost related to?
Trying to balance the budget.
So what are we deferring maintenance?
We have to do an expectation of what our costs are going to be for the year. So
Right.
we're trying to, go ahead.
Yeah, Todd, I think you're picking up, is there more than one microphone or more than one speaker going? We're getting some echoing.
Let me jump in for a second. It's a bit of guesswork to understand how much how many sunny days we're going to have next year and how much credits we're going to get from the field. And so it's not something that we can define with any exact.
I would like some more information on that, please.
Sure.
And secondarily, was there a vote on raising transfer station costs and fees?
Yes, there was.
Can I ask what they were? I'm not opposed, by the way. I use the transfer station. It's a great deal.
So I didn't bring that home with me specifically, but in general, we would be raising the decal fees. I think it would be $15 a year for everyone. And we will be switching from bag stickers to colored bags. They'd be the same price as the stickers. But one of the things we find is that people, not all people, but some people don't necessarily get a sticker on a bag or buy larger bags so that they can put more in them for the same sticker, and it's not necessarily equitable. So we think that will be a significant change in revenue. And then we're going to raise the rates for roll-off containers. We're actually going to double that because be more competitive with the market that we compete with, still less than the commercial haulers, but more reflective of our costs for that service. And we're going to work harder at marketing and selling some of the things that we have available at the station than we've been doing before, and raising the costs of those, again, making them more cost friendly than someone could buy wood chips or compost from another source, but helping to balance the overall cost of the station.
Thank you.
I'll get you those details tomorrow.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Very good. Other questions that people have?
Yep. Arthur?
Yes.
I've got one. Blythe, just a quick question. You also mentioned in the select board meeting about raising ambulance receipts or ambulance revenues. Is that raising the rate for transports, or are you just projecting a higher number? And the reason I'm asking is I think early in the fire chief's presentation, he made a comment that he's observing right now, they're getting ambulance calls and people are refusing transport out of fear of going to the hospital. And I think if he's seeing that now, I think we can reasonably expect that that would continue for some period of time. I mean, I would extrapolate that we might see lower ambulance receipts than what was initially projected, or certainly that we saw last year. So I just wanted to reconcile those two comments.
So we raised the rates in November of 2019, and we do not plan to raise them again. I think we want to be more mindful of keeping pace with the marketplace, if you will, of our neighboring communities. But I can't say with any specificity when we would consider raising them again, because these were significant. But when I spoke with the chief about this yesterday, in the most recent month of data that he has, the ambulance revenue was over $50,000 for 1 month. So when we looked at the trend since November and the trend of the past year, we determined that we felt that raising it from, I think, 410 to 470 was reasonable, based on the rates, based on the fact that when since we can adequately staff the second ambulance, we're not losing revenue to other communities. And I think we all hope that this COVID-19 pandemic will be behind us in, weeks or hopefully a month or so. And I don't think we see at this point a reason to lower it more, because I think our projections are that we're going to be bringing in much more than 470. And so we felt that this was a reasonable place to land.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Jonathan. Okay, well, I think the last item on our agenda then is to talk a little bit about the schedule, Susan. But before we get to that, I wanted just to share some thoughts about our online meetings. I have seen us, we're still adapting to the Zoom approach and infrastructure. I would love it if we could have all of the attachments earlier for the meeting than we do at present. And I'm curious for Blythe and Susan's perspective on this. I mean, I guess in my dream world, I would love to have all the documents related to the meeting by a Friday. And that way, Monday morning, I generate the link. Susan can post the link as well as all the documents to the town calendar. And then the town citizenry and whomever and all of us have, Monday, Tuesday, and then our meeting is Wednesday night to then read or study the material. Is that timeline realistic? Do folks have other suggestions?
So I didn't get everything out until Tuesday, and then couple of things got changed. So it should work. I was off Monday, I had a vacation day, but if we shoot for Fridays, it's just, I think we need to be mindful of the fact that Blythe is working, with the select board and Todd in meeting and regularly to try to get to the number we need to get to. So I'm certainly happy to get the stuff out as early as I can, but just that we need to be mindful that some of these things are changing daily.
I don't have a problem with it at all, Arthur. I'm glad to know what your deadline is that you want, and we'll work to that. I always want to make sure, I know for the select board, when we get the meeting posted, I want to be able to leave for home that night knowing everything's in their hands, in the public's hands that they're looking for. So we'll definitely put it on our radar screen that you want them Friday, and in an absolute worst case that we'd have them to Sue so she could get them up with the agenda first thing Monday morning.
I mean, I could do a better job too of generating the link earlier. I should have done that further in advance. So it's something I want to put more time in there. So I appreciate that that willingness to give us more buffer. Susan Klein, you had a question.
Well, it's not a question, it's more of a statement. I think, I know I spoke with Susan Jacobson earlier about things that were on the agenda this evening that ended up being pushed and canceled. And I think that we, as a board and as the people, speaking to people for either through the different towns or citizens who are coming to speak at our meetings or want to be heard, that they are mindful of once they're on the agenda, they really need to stick with that, because town people are working their own personal schedules around what we say is going to be there, and to find out, the morning of, the day before, whatever, that what they were coming to the meeting to hear isn't going to be represented that evening. I would think that, it's no different than if they were supposed to be there in person and people got sitters and were trying to make a meeting in person. I think we need to make sure that everyone understands who is coming, that we have this, that they're on the schedule and that they're committed to coming, and that it doesn't change. And that's not just for the board. That's, obviously that's for the citizens who are coming in, because we're going to be at the meetings no matter what. And we understand that things change, but people who are planning to join a Zoom call or show up to a meeting in person might not have the time to check Facebook or to check the town website the day of to see that what they were coming for is no longer going to be presented. That was one thing. And the second thing is I've noticed that in our live meetings, and I think this just is a side effect of having Zoom calls, but I wanted, the board to be aware of it. In our live meetings, we have a lot more conversation. We discuss and debate back and forth a lot more in person, which again is a side effect from just being on Zoom. I think that's probably the same across the board. But I think that everybody on advisory needs to remember, if they would have said it in person, they should say it here. And if I know we want to utilize the raise your hand button, but sometimes people raise their hand and then they've forgotten what they were going to say. And we don't necessarily raise our hands in the meeting. So we also, when they're presenting budgets, I've noticed we're now, which I think is the very polite thing to do. No argument on that. I'm just trying to figure out a better way to handle it moving forward. When they're presenting their budgets in person to us over the years, as they're presenting, we have asked questions as they're going along, because a lot of times if you wait till the end, you've either forgotten your question or it's not as easily to go back and recall it. The presentation is directly in front of you. So I'm noticing that people are asking fewer and fewer questions because we're not asking them as we go. So I don't know if we want to discuss the ability to maybe have each person presenting, as long as we're going to be doing these things, having people presenting, go maybe 3-4 pages and then ask if there's any questions. Because when we were doing them in person, we would literally just raise our hand and be like, hey, I have a quick question here before you move on. And we can't really do that on a Zoom call. So I'm noticing there's a lot less back and forth between us as well as between us and the presenters.
Thank you. That's a good point. Well, I can commit to, if you do raise your hand and somebody's speaking, I can work to interrupt them. But I think it's also a good idea to have built-in pauses and breaks to your, I think that's a great suggestion. I am concerned about folks all jumping in kind of at the same, talking over each other. But I do agree that on the scale of mass chaos versus, no one sharing, we're probably too far over to the side of people's questions or concerns not being shared. So let's definitely be less shy about raising your hand and so forth. And Susan, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of fill everybody in. The two gentlemen that were coming in this evening to speak to the citizens petition, I think I reached out to them yesterday. I don't have my emails in front of me to pull up. Just as a reminder, which I typically do for people that are presenting. And one of the gentlemen reminded me that he had forgotten that Passover started today and he was having a virtual family Seder celebration. So I offered, like I've done in the past, did they want to, he was concerned that he couldn't make it on for his 8 o'clock time. And so I offered to reschedule based on him having that holiday celebration. That is something that we have offered in the past. If it's something that this group does not want me to do in the future, then I'll do that. I think the time we're in right now, we all need to be, we're all experiencing having to be flexible. And I understand that people maybe were going to come on tonight to watch that. And I can't change the agenda once it's posted once it's gone beyond the 48 hours. So I understand that, but I just wanted it to be clear to everybody that I did make the offer to allow them to come at a different time. And if we don't want to do that in the future, I just need direction on that.
No, thank you. I think that was the correct way to go. I think that the difficulty here, and I'll open it up to questions. I see some hands up. The difficulty from my perspective is if we are updating information in emails substantially in our email threads, like the day before a meeting, if that's our habit, there's no way the public will ever get oriented or we'll catch up with that. We are effectively not having a public meeting with that level of change. Being online, I think, forces us to be more structured and to put more time. So I don't want to have no considerations being made. I just hope that as we all adjust to this, we can still be considerate, but all understand that we need to plan a little further in advance for us to have effective participation. We can't just rely on, well, people show up at the meeting, we'll have handouts. Not going to work anymore. We weren't able to have the correct links up for tonight. Actually, there were 2 conflicting links I noticed, and the documents aren't there. So I don't want to become a heartless bureaucracy, but with the same token, I think we need to plan a little bit further than we are today.
The documents are there, Arthur.
Okay, that might be my
Yeah,
my bad.
they
Thank you.
were put up yesterday, and then a new Chief Kenny shortened his presentation a little bit from the Saturday budget hearing, and he sent that to me today, so I got that up as well.
Okay, thank you. Now for some hands. Susan Klein, you've been waiting. Yes.
Just want to, since I'm the one that raised the question or made the comment, I want to make sure that everyone understands. Susan, I was not, first, I think you said that he reminded you that it was Passover. He actually never told you that he needed to celebrate Passover. So there wasn't a situation where you were in the wrong. You were confirming, and it's, unfortunately, it can't be your responsibility to understand what his personal plans would be. I know that there are people who, a lot of people celebrate Passover, but people generally know the week before, if not 2 weeks before. So I would hope that you're not taking responsibility for that. Number one, I just want to make sure that everyone knows. I know I wasn't saying it about you. I just wanted to make sure everybody else knows I wasn't saying it about you. The second thing, I agree that we need to be more flexible. Everyone understands that this is a different time, but we also have to understand that, again, these aren't people showing up to a meeting and getting a handout. They're coming in, they don't know how to use the platform. They don't know where to get the information from. Sometimes following along on the screen is difficult for them. It's difficult for us, and we've been doing it for 3 and 4 weeks. We do have to be flexible, but at the same time, there has to be some consistencies as well. Maybe, Arthur, and obviously you're the chair, this is up to you, but if you were requesting that documents be submitted by Friday, then maybe all confirmed people are submitted as, confirmed by Friday. And once they're in the agenda, they're in the agenda. And if they choose not to come or can't, then I don't know that it's on us necessarily to try to reschedule them. I guess maybe that would be what I would say is, once they're confirmed and they're on the agenda, then they're on the agenda. And if they would like to present, they show up. And if they're willing to give up their slot, then they're willing to give up their slot.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll work with Blythe to strive for, let's say, by the latest end of business Friday to do that. So thank you. Kristen Baelish, you had your hand up. I guess it's no longer up.
Arthur, if I could interrupt just for a second,
Yes,
Chief
Susan.
Stone just sent a text because he must still be watching. He said, if any member has a question that they did not get to ask, have them call me, email him, or stop down as they practice physical distancing, and he's open to answering any questions that anybody else may have.
From 6 feet away.
Right, from 6 feet away.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate his availability. Kristen, yes, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, sorry, I guess can't help myself. Yeah, I'll just add that, I think flexibility is important, but I think beyond just citizens, as Susan mentioned, for us, it's actually really important to kind of have a good sense of what each agenda is going to be and try to stick to it, because, I'm newer to this committee, but I've noticed that all 9 of us aren't going to make it every week. And we all are making choices, especially right now, to take care of loved ones, and we're balancing more than ever. And so, for example, in 2 weeks, I can't be at a meeting, but if I knew that something on the agenda was critical we were voting on, I don't know what I would do, but I might try to figure something out, versus maybe I wouldn't if it was something that was, a little more pedestrian or something we weren't voting that day. So, I think as much as we can try to have, our agendas, several weeks in advance, so we kind of have a sense of what's going on for the next 2 to 3 meetings. Irrespective of this particular issue with tonight, I think in general, that's been something that I have struggled with a little bit since being on the committee, knowing from week to week what we'll be kind of addressing more than 1 week out.
Understood. Thank you. So Susan, our next meeting is next Wednesday, I believe, correct?
David's like waving his hand. I don't know.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't looking at the wrong screen. David, yes.
Sorry to be a thorn in the side of everyone, but and I'm not trying to provoke an argument here. I'm just going to state that the agendas don't have to be set more than 48 hours before the meeting, if I'm not mistaken, under the public meeting law. And that will govern a lot of what happens. Yes, Kristen, you're right. We can set an agenda, but if something comes up, it doesn't happen that way. In terms of what Susan said about the way the meetings are run, I got to admit that sometimes I felt that the in-person meetings were a little bit too freewheeling. And that maybe she's probably right that we're not asking enough questions, but extemporaneous comments and conversations between members and things relative to who's in front of us is also frustrating to me, in that it's not moving things forward. It's a conversation amongst the 7 or 8 of us, or 7 or 6 of us, or 5 of us, that probably should be taken offline during presentations and occur after presentations. And that's all I'd have to say about that.
Thank you, David. I mean, I would comment that I know different people have different styles. Some people are much more comfortable interjecting, interrupting. They're more, for lack of a better word, verbal warriors. Other people like to take notes, have their thoughts together, and then share after. So I certainly hope that using Zoom and us all having, our best of intentions and being colleagues, that we can accommodate both. So I would like to leave room where if there's something really urgent in a 20-minute presentation, we don't have to wait 20 minutes to ask it. But by the same token, we want to avoid a free-for-all. I do encourage people to write things down as they come to then address it. You've all seen, I think, like a congressional hearing where the senator or the congressperson is tearing the poor witness a new one, as they say, and they're sort of writing things down, waiting for their chance. I don't think we're in that kind of conflict situation, but notes can be a beautiful thing. So
Art?
thank you. Yes, Susan, go ahead.
So Kristen, just to kind of go back to your point, I will tell you that in my 10 years, I had a brief absence when somebody took over, but this scheduling this spring has been by far the most difficult, and I think it's for several reasons. Typically by now we have a budget that we're already, we know a hard number. So we're moving through departments each week. We know who's coming. COVID has certainly, set us all back a little bit. So I will be very mindful of trying to get the agendas set. But really at this point, to set them out more than even next week, the select board won't be meeting again until the 21st.
Yeah.
So which leads me into our next meeting. We will have the citizens petition individuals come in. I have extended that invitation to them. So I believe they'll be first. And one of my questions to the board tonight is, what other department heads are you looking to have come in before the advisory committee? Or do you want Blythe and Todd to come in and present the rest of the department's budgets? That's really something we have to try to iron out.
Okay, I'm looking for hands on that topic while people are considering that. Will Jay Tollerman be able to attend our meeting next week or give his comments in writing? I know he very much wanted our moderator to weigh in on the citizens petition.
Yes, I did speak with Jay today, and he will be available next week.
Wonderful. We'll get him the link in plenty of time. Okay.
Yes.
I will work to get that out earlier. Other comments to Susan's point here? Any people we'd like to have? Okay, David, yes.
So I guess part of it depends on where we're at with where the department's going to end up at. In other words, there's no sense having someone in next week if the selectmen are intending to, I'll pick on someone that Christian will be concerned about. What if they cut the library by more than what they just said they were going to cut it? She's going to want to have the library director in. Facilities is the same thing with me. I'm very interested in how the facilities run in the town, and if they're going to look to reduce custodial staff or maintenance budgets, those are the kinds of things I want to know. But if I don't know that between now and next Wednesday, I'm not sure it's worth scheduling anyone.
Blythe, can you speak a little bit to where we're at from a sequencing perspective?
Well, this is my first year all the way through the budget, and so
Congratulations.
yeah. What is normal?
Yeah. Sorry.
So normal is typically Blythe.
I'm kidding. I
Okay,
just it's just been quite
this is not normal.
Say, hell if I know.
Oh my goodness. You know, that's what's so hard, Dave, is that you know, I like to think that we're in a good place on the budget, but I know that, you know, at some point we're going to get guidance from the state about where, you know, what changes they'll make, and we need to react to that. And I don't know if it's going to be before the end of May or not. I'm more than happy to come next week and just go through any budgets anybody wants to, you know, absent any other issues. I mean, the select board before this really, the pandemic really set in, seemed generally comfortable with approximately where we are. But now possibly that's changing, and none of us have any good intelligence about what that will be and when it will be. So, you know, from where I sit just as the town administrator, I'm not planning to make any other major changes in the budget till I know what budget changes need to be made, and then we'll figure out how to do that, whether they're smaller or they're larger. I didn't realize that's really an answer, but
What have they voted anything yet?
they didn't vote last night because, again, we just don't know. Everyone assumes that the state will make adjustments in local aid, but we don't know how much and we don't know when.
Not gonna happen.
Okay, Susan, you had a question.
Prediction.
Susan Klein.
Yes. Has everyone who was scheduled to present to us presented to us except for the citizens petition?
So typically, and if I go based on prior years, the department heads, some of the larger department heads come in and present, like the fire department, like the police chief, and some of the other larger departments, DPW. In some years, the facilities department has come in, the building commissioner has come in, but again, I think to echo what Dave says, you know, if we're not at a hard and fast number approved by the select board, then those people could come in right now with their thinking that, you know, this is their budget, and the select board in Blythe, based on numbers that they get from the state, may have to alter those budgets significantly. So then we'd be looking for them to come back in, I guess, if.
No, I understood. No, I understood that. I'm saying so far we've had the overall town budget presentation. We've had both schools, and now we've had police and fire. I believe the only one that generally comes in who hasn't done so is DPW, or did they come in and I'm forgetting them already?
Nope, they've come in.
So everybody who usually presents has presented. So as long as there are no changes going forward, these budgets would be the ones that we vote on. With that said, what other than the citizens petition, which now makes even less sense that we wouldn't have be having a meeting next week, I would assume, if it weren't for that. Is there can we start voting on the warrants that are not related to the budget so that we can at least get a jump on those things? Or are we holding off on all voting of all warrants until we know more of what's coming down? I'm just trying to figure out if we're going to meet next week. And there's nothing, because we're not all driving and getting babysitters and whatever else that we have to do to put our lives on hold to go to a meeting at town hall. It's certainly, because it's a Zoom meeting, it's a little bit easier to get online, have a 30-minute meeting to discuss the citizens petition, and then end the meeting. We don't have to have more things to do because it's online. But in general, we wouldn't normally have a meeting with just that one reason. So my question is, are we still going to meet next week? since we have no other presentations that are due right now, and are we going to start next week voting on some of the warrants that we're able to, that are not necessarily impacted by the budget, which may change, or are we going to hold off on everything until we know more?
Okay, thank you, Susan. Blythe has her hand up to respond. Then I wanted to get to a question by Brian. So Blythe, do you have any warrant comments?
I do. So I understand that the planning board is going to meet next week, and they're going to withdraw the various articles that are on the list related to rezoning for Southwood Hospital. So that is significantly going to reduce the size of the warrant. There is one article that we probably want to talk about, which is, I don't have the number in front of me, the one where the school committee would like to see a reserve stabilization fund set up for special education. We haven't really talked that one through. That's one that's a little bit different. Other than that, most of the articles are pretty routine. We've changed up, how we would like to present, say, the water and wastewater enterprise funds. But Jay had pointed out early on that perhaps we want to keep this town meeting as straightforward as possible. So I would just point that one out. And I know that the CPC may be meeting in the next week or two to potentially bring forth an article to be in a position to spend money for affordable housing rent. I think Sue can answer this one better than I can. I haven't seen the language yet. So I don't want to I agree with you, having a meeting just to have one may not make sense, but we haven't really walked through some of the articles. And if you want to do that, I'm happy to do that as well.
Okay, that sounds like a good idea to me. Thank you, Blythe. Let me go to Brian's question. Yes, Brian.
So one of the things that is a bit frustrating on the way things have gone this spring is reviewing the budgets a few times and then having significant changes happen after the presentations. I was surprised at some of the magnitude of changes that came through after we had heard those. So like tonight, Blythe, when you were talking about the changes with employee contribution and some of the larger revenue around transfer station and the like, those are substantial changes after we've already reviewed those budgets. When I used to do the budget build for the Air Force for $11 billion a year, we would not have significant changes after briefing our major stakeholders and boards ahead of time. And I know it's a little bit different here, but it is hard to dedicate the time to review things and then have significant changes that are like 5 or 6 of them listed out in the period of about 30 seconds without understanding and going back through what all of those interdependencies are. So if there's a way that we can either review the budgets when they're, and I know the intent is to bring them up here when they're nearly frozen, but it feels, it's frustrating that there are significant changes after we've taken the time to go through each of the department budgets.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. Yes, I know it's harder to get, I think, as linear of a flow as we've had in the past. Of course, for Blythe, there really is no past, so this is all that you've known. Just any perspective you want to share on that, Blythe?
I certainly appreciate that, Brian. It's been a little frustrating for us too, because we get to what we think is acceptable and then something changes, or things that we've put forth as recommendations aren't something the board is comfortable with, and we've got to adjust again. Perhaps next week would be a good chance to go through some of these in more detail and bring you up to speed. I mean, as I said earlier, it's somewhat my hope that if we don't have the information to know how we need to adjust from here, that where we are now is where we're going to be for June 9th.
Right.
So we can have a meeting on June 9th.
Yeah, I appreciate your position as well, and I think that's that is something that I understand, and that you're working towards other guidance that you're getting. I just it is a difficult position to be put in where we will be asked to support or not support the budget. And we will have seen the detailed pieces weeks ahead of time with several changes in between. And if the remedy is we go through and have a detailed review of everything again, I feel as if our earlier time was not well spent. So I'm not, this is not a comment on you, Blythe, on how it's working.
Sure.
It's more of a process question on how often are we going to change this between now and then, and in spending more time to go through detail next week would not be a good decision, I don't think, because I have personally right now no confidence that things won't change between next week and town meeting in substantial ways again.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Blythe.
I just said, I understand.
Okay, very good. And I think next week's meeting, if I can sum this up, we would like to address the citizens petition. We would appreciate a walkthrough of warrant articles that we have not yet discussed. And if we can vote on something, I would love to take care of some items then. I agree that getting deep into budget territory probably doesn't make sense at our next meeting. If things emerge, of course, we would love to know when you know, Blythe, but maybe other than just kind of an orientation of where we stand, the majority of the meeting will be the citizens' position and just get into warrant article reviews.
So
It's kind of
just,
like the weather in New England. If you don't like it, wait a minute, it will change.
Yeah, Susan, yes, you had a comment.
yeah, just to speak to Blythe's point, the CPC committee is meeting next week to see if we can get an article together, because along with mass housing and some other people in the state, they're going to allow CPC funds that are designated for the Affordable Housing Trust to be used to assist people that may need some assistance with rent. So if the vote comes out of that committee as a yes, then they'll be putting an article together that I'll be working with them closely on, because I'll be the individual that administers that program that determines the people within income guidelines and all of that stuff. So I do anticipate probably having another article to ask the select board to put on the warrant.
Okay, thank you, Susan. David, yes, I see your hand up.
Susan, is that COVID-19 related, or is that just a general?
It's COVID-19 related.
Are we going to be able to identify what that means to the town in the next 2 months? You know what I mean? I mean, is there a sense of who's eligible for that at all? I mean,
Well, it'll be based on the same income levels that is released by HUD every year. And it will be, there are 3 different income levels. There are affordable, low income level, and very low income level. But I certainly imagine that we have some people in town, although we don't have a tremendous amount of rental properties, we certainly have some family housing where I anticipate some people will be losing their jobs, and paying their rent will be very difficult for them. This is something that was released by a group of housing partnerships. They requested this be allowed, that this money be allowed. We'll have to set a limit, so there's a lot of parameters that will go around it, but I think there will absolutely be some need for it.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we have a sense of next week's meeting. Again, it would be great to get the warrant articles as finalized as we can by the day after tomorrow, just for us to then have something baseline to discuss on Wednesday. Any other questions that people have, or is there anything that I've missed, Susan?
Kristen has her hand raised.
All right, and I apologize if I missed this. I listened to the select board meeting last night as well, and I couldn't quite get the sense of, is there a drop dead date at which point the select board is going to okay a budget, right? Because I feel like we keep on moving it, which I understand. And last night's meeting was pretty clear about what we're waiting on, which is state aid. But I'm also hearing Blythe say that that could take longer than we think. It could be into May, it could be into June. And so, we need to have time, and the public has to have time to process what this means for them when it finally comes out. And so is there a date at which people are committing, the select board is committing to saying yay or nay and moving it forward?
Kind of in an awkward position here.
Maybe it's more a factual question, right? I didn't hear it. So it
Kevin's
was that not
hiding.
committed to at this point? Like, is that something that is being potentially addressed next week? It's not a gotcha question, I promise.
No, I know it isn't. I don't mean that at all. From my perspective, thinking about all that needs to happen with the warrant and the book and everything, I'd like to think we're making drawing a line in the sand at the first meeting in May, knowing that gives you guys time to get what you need done. But I'm also a little bit anxious about whether or not we can actually have town meeting on June 9th, because I just don't know where we're going with the pandemic. So, worst case, we can't even have a meeting in June, and we're dealing with a 1/12 budget in July, staying at all the same numbers we're at right now till we are out of the emergency and we can actually hold a meeting. And state law is, has provisions for all of that. So I'm at a loss to what to tell you. That's what I'd like to do, but I'm not sure what I'd like to do is actually going to happen.
I
That's
appreciate
totally
the
fair.
target. Yeah, I appreciate the target. Thank you. Okay, so coming up with the 9 o'clock hour, any other final questions that people have? Okay, no, looks like we're all set. I will just try a voice vote here. Can I get a motion for us to adjourn?
1 second.
Oh, yes.
Just want to confirm, sorry, we had a couple of different conversations going back and forth. I just want to confirm that we are meeting next week, and that as of right now, we are going to discuss and have the citizens petition present. And then we are going to vote on any warrant articles that are not part of either budget or need further presentation or going to be pulled. And then we're going to take a hiatus, I'm assuming, until we can figure things out further. I just want to make sure I understand so that people ask questions. They're like, hey, what's going on next week? Do I need to pay attention to this meeting and things like that? I just want to make sure I'm giving people the right information.
That's my understanding, with maybe just the caveat that we'll vote on some things. I hope to vote on some articles next week, but I also expect that Blythe will review things we haven't really had a chance to talk about. So there could be some things we decide, maybe we want to have somebody come in. But so some voting will occur, but I just want us to spend time in the warrant. We've really done a lot of presentations and haven't gone over warrant language much at all. So lots of review, some voting, I hope. And of course, the citizens petition. Susan, does that make sense?
Perfect. I'll work with Blythe to get the warrant uploaded on the My Town Government website and to get it to all of you on Friday.
Okay.
So
thank
maybe
you.
if you could try to have a link for me on Friday, that would
I
be
will.
great.
I will. Blythe, does that plan make sense to you?
Yes.
Okay, the big Blythe thumbs up. Outstanding. Okay, so looking for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
And a second.
Second.
Okay, we'll do this by a voice vote. All in favor to adjourn, say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay.
Nay.
We have one nay that I'm not sure the seriousness of, but it is clear. I don't think we need to do a roll call vote that the majority agrees we can adjourn. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your patience. I will see you next week.
Good night,
Be
all.
well.
Bye.
Be well.